What's up, everyone? Here for another episode of Locked On Bucks, and we've got two of our favorites here on the show. I did say we were going to all get together, and we are here for today's show, and we're going to continue talking about the draft a little bit and what the expectations might be. We're only a couple of weeks away from that, and I want to ask these guys if there's anything they're taking away from the NBA Finals that either makes them annoyed that the Bucks aren't there, or makes them think that there are holes to fill on this Bucks team. So we're gonna have some fun today. Anyway, that's the idea. So let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on the show Monday to Friday. Also, find me all the stuff over at ESPN. Camille Davis is here from the Technical Foul podcast, and Justin Garcia is here from the Bucks Radio Network. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen or watch of every day. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, I can't remember. I don't think, Camille, the three of us have podcasted together. Is that accurate?
I don't think so. I think this might be the first time we've had this particular threesome on the podcast.
Well, I do have to say as well, Camille, you probably didn't, I don't know whether you wanted me to say it or not, but I did mention that you were having some struggles with the voice with some illness over the last week. So,
yeah.
So we're glad to have you back. We're glad to see you looking healthy, looking well.
Yeah, it's I'm glad to be back. Being back here means that I'm getting back to myself. I'm still a little congested. COVID tried to take your girl out, but a lot of fluids, a lot of rest, and a lot of non-human contact. So I'm happy to be talking to other people at this point.
That's what you get for traveling, by the way.
I know. In
2022, it's you take a risk, Justin. Have you been traveling anywhere, Justin?
Recently? Me? No. I've been traveling as far as 20 minutes away from where I live. That's about it since the season ended.
Okay, that's not too far off from me. But we've got a question to get things started here, and it's going to you, Camille. It comes from Matt Sinclair on the YouTube channel, and Justin, obviously you'll be involved with this. But Matt asks, Camille, if you had Justin's job for a day, what would you change? Is there anything you would change? And then Matt throws in the added note of, would you just troll the Chicago Bulls all day, every day?
Anyone who listens to me on this show or Tech File, they know I'm pretty diplomatic. I think I would pretty much follow Justin's footsteps in that way. I wouldn't change too much. I might try to throw a little shade at the Chicago Bulls from time to time, but not too much. Just a little bit. Just keep it interesting.
We could probably arrange something too. I mean, pick a game next year, and I could be sick, and you can take over there and see how it goes.
For sure.
Camille's basically trying to say that you're not much of a homer, which I would. It's not Boston. It's not Boston levels of homerism, but I'd say we know where your allegiances lie, which I think is perfectly fine on a local broadcast. But I mentioned this at the top. The NBA Finals is interesting. Now, Justin, by the way, I'm not 100% sure if I'm remembering this correctly, but Boston won Game 1. And did you send out some sort of tweet like, I told you all that Boston is going to win this series or something like that? Because I think, look, we discussed this. If I really had to make a prediction for the NBA Finals, I would have said Warriors in 5, which I know was an aggressive prediction.
Really aggressive.
And after game 1, it wasn't looking great. But after game 2, we're back on track. So the question is, how are you feeling?
I still feel pretty good. I thought going into the series, the Celtics were going to win in 6. And after game 1, I remember having the conversation with somebody else of like, well, you could talk me into Celtics in 5 here. I just like the way that they match up. And then game 2 happened. But the similarities between the Celtics and the Bucks from last year, we've talked about it a number of times, but all the way down to the fact that the Celtics just in every single series seem to make it more difficult than it needs to be, which was a Bucks staple from a year ago.
I think it's interesting. Yeah, but that's a really good point, because I do think, and we've said this before, we're not hiding away from it. There is a level of bitterness there, I'm sure, if you're a Bucks fan towards the Celtics. There's no doubt about that. And they are, in many aspects, a pretty annoying team to watch, and some of the antics and all those types of things, some of the stuff they say. I think Grant Williams was the last one talking about Draymond Green and being ejected, and it's just like, I don't know. They're just a difficult team to really get behind. But for you, Camille, is there anything you're watching in this series? And I think, Justin, you're right. The fact that the Bucks went to 7 games without Chris Middleton, maybe that's why I'm a little biased, because I'm thinking, well, first of all, we understand how great Giannis is. But for the Bucks to even get to Game 7, it's just hard.
Heat series, too. The fact that the Heat were as banged up as they were and took them to 7.
It's just like
the Warriors look terrible.
Yeah, and the Warriors I can buy as a championship team, Camille, but I just can't get myself to the point that's saying this Boston team is a title-winning team.
No, yeah. My thoughts when we had the Milwaukee-Boston series was that whoever won that series was going to go to the finals. Now, I didn't think that necessarily Boston would win in the finals if they got there. And when I saw how the Warriors were playing too, I was like, this should be a very interesting matchup, because I think one thing about Golden State is that I feel like their defense is a little underrated at this point. Not that they have so many like plus defenders, but they just play so well together. Even seeing Steph Curry and the effort that he's been putting on the defensive end of the floor, I've just kind of been like, okay, like if they can keep the pressure up, at some point Boston, I hate to say it like this, but they're probably going to, give the ball over. Like they're going to make it difficult on themselves. And when they do that, Golden State's a team that will gladly take advantage of it, even with Klay Thompson being off. When you have threats out there like Steph Curry, Jordan Poole got hot in Game 2, and they just get contributions just up and down the board on their team. So, like, it's a hard team to really make mistakes against, because if you do, they're going to take advantage of it. And Boston is a team that tends to make a lot of mistakes. And I think in part because they don't have a real point guard. No shade to Marcus Smart, but like they don't have someone to get them together offensively generally. So there's a lot of room for error. And when you're playing this team like the Warriors, like you don't really have that much room for error. And on top of that too, that's probably the most high powered offense that the Celtics have seen this playoffs. Like it was funny in Game 1 where I'm watching them go under with Steph Curry for like the first 2 quarters. And I'm like, that's not like no shade, but that's not Drew Holiday. That's not Kyle Lowry. That is one of the greatest shooters to ever exist. Like you need to come up. So I don't know. I personally had Golden State winning the series. I said probably go 7 because Boston always seems to make things go 7 at this point. But I could definitely see Golden State taking it in 6.
Yeah, it's weird because when I was talking on yesterday's podcast, or a couple of days ago now, when I went solo, I said that the one thing that I was looking at this series and looking at Golden State, and I guess in my head, the reason why I think that they were going to win this series is because, and a lot of it's just memory of Klay Thompson, but I still believe at some point he's going to have a game. Jordan Poole, we saw, he hit some shots. He hit a half-court shot. It was ridiculous. But then the more I thought about it, even after I finished podcasting, because I've said that watching these finals makes me think that the Bucks, when you just look at what they were trying to achieve offensively, with just no one that can do anything on the perimeter, really get their own shot, dribble, outside of Giannis. And Drew, again, it's not that he's awful, but he's not Steph Curry, as Camille pointed to. So then I thought about it, and I thought, but maybe the Warriors actually don't have a lot of it either. And Steph Curry is just Steph Curry, so that just makes everything else look amazing when really it's just this one guy that is generational. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's a chicken and egg theory too, where he is just so good, and it's unlike anything that we've seen. And when he plays like that too, like he did in Game 2, the team is just unbeatable. Like when does Steph have one of those big games and they lose? It was really the thing we said about Giannis too, up until Game 6, when there was just literally no help next to him. But it's interesting that I think we all have kind of the same takeaway here, that if Chris Middleton was healthy, I feel pretty good that the Bucks would have won that series. I mean, at the very least, even the games that they lost, they're much more competitive. So I saw some people point out, well, even if they get to the finals, I mean, look at the amount of threes they gave up to the Celtics. What do you think the Warriors would do? Which is partially true, but I know we've talked about before too. One, the Bucks and Giannis specifically have always just been a weird matchup for the Warriors. And, for all the complaints that the defensive system got, what we said from the start was this system is one that's predicated on If there are 4 shooters on the floor, it's going to be pretty good. If there's 5, then yeah, it's going to have its challenges. So the minutes that Draymond Green is on the floor, I know what he brings defensively, but that's the area where the defense can say, fine, we're letting Draymond Green shoot, and we're going to play the way that we did a season ago. So I think it would have been Bucks and Warriors would have been a really good finals. And that's also, starting to become like the Super Bowl of Brady and Rodgers of, man, we still haven't gotten Giannis and Steph in the finals against each other.
Giannis and Steph, Giannis and LeBron as well. There's a few, then you're obviously starting to run out of time with LeBron. Although, as I mentioned yesterday, maybe Bucks fans will have a slight little soft spot for the Lakers now. Obviously, hopefully Darvin does well.
I doubt it.
I thought his introductory press conference was pretty damn good. Speaking of Steph, though, he might be about to win his first Finals MVP. And if you want to check out those odds, go to betonline.net. It's the number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. He's the clear favorite right now, and he would absolutely have to be, because the Celtics have just been a little bit up and down to start the series. Obviously, Al Horford was good in game 1. Jaylen Brown was pretty good in game 2, but Jason Tatum's been okay. But Steph is the favorite for NBA Finals MVP. But if you're interested in that, go to betonline.net. You can also check out NHL hockey playoffs, baseball that's going on, MMA, UFC, boxing, everything in between, esports, and all sorts of stuff there as well. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. Guys, we also have a listener survey, and you guys may have some feedback you want to give me from the days that you're not on the podcast. And if you do want to do so, you can go to what is the website here? LockedOnPodcast.com/survey right now to get started. It won't take very long, and everyone that completes a survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take our audience survey, go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey. We would really appreciate that. But Camille, we haven't really caught up since the end of this season too much. So me and Justin have banged on back and forth about our thoughts about the team, all sorts of different things. I've been on the Brook Lopez bandwagon nonstop in terms of wanting him back. How do you feel about the team, about the, quite honestly, limited options they have in the offseason, about the draft, just a sort of a wide look at where you think this team is at and what you would do? And would you do anything crazy? Where are you feeling crazy? Are you trying to trade one of the key players? Where are you at?
See, the thing with the whole going crazy thing, like, I saw some people who on Twitter were actually upset that Bud was not fired this year. And I'm just kind of like how are we still at this point, given the fact that the Bucks went 7 games with Boston without Chris Middleton? Like, it feels like next year is just going to be like a run it back year as best as it can be, just to see, like, again, like, hey, we're already kind of locked in with our top 3 guys here, with Giannis, with Drew, with Chris. We're just kind of locked into here. We got Brooks still, and in some strange way, maybe him having most of this season off, is going to be good for him going forward, because it's kind of like an abbreviated season for him, where he didn't have to put as much on his legs this year. But I would honestly just try to run it back. Try to re-sign Bobby. Try to re-sign Pat. If we can get like another young center on the free agent market who can kind of play behind Brook, see if he's somebody who could, eventually take over for Brook. I definitely would be on board for that. Also would love to get just another bigger wing player. I think I mentioned this before, but outside of Chris Middleton, like, the Bucks they don't really have any big wings. And that's just an area where I'm like, if we could fill that gap, whether it's in the draft with, a young prospect, a vet, a cheap vet, someone else who we can throw out there, I would love to see that. I do have some concerns with the guard rotation at this point. George Hill was not looking the way I was hoping that he would down the stretch. And I know he was getting over injury. So on one hand, you might say, hey, well, let's just see how he is, after an offseason where he's able to rest up, get better. Other hand, you might start to wonder, given his age, have we already seen the best that George Hill can offer? So I think if we can shore up in those places, and honestly, when it comes to the Bucks, year in and year out, internal improvement, I know that sounds kind of cheap to say, but like it's something that's important. And every year we've seen Giannis add to his game. The Bucks are going to go as far as Giannis can lead him and as healthy as Chris and Drew can be around him, because those three together, when they're playing together, they just work so well together. So I wouldn't do anything super drastic. I wouldn't try to blow it up. Just try to kind of reinforce the roster a little bit where they can.
I'll tell you what they need, Justin. They need year 3 Jordan Nwora to become a player, because when you talk about internal development, there just really isn't that many guys there that you're like, okay. I mean, of course, Giannis gets better every year. Yeah, whatever. You get Chris back, all those kinds of things. But they're your top end players. And in terms of deep in the rotation, there's not a lot of guys there. Like Pat has consistently improved the last few years. That's been great. So is Bobby Portis. You hope that both of those guys are back. But really, Jordan Nwora is the only guy, and we don't even know if he's going to return. But I would imagine they would be able to keep him for relatively cheap. And if you get anything out of him in terms of being reliable on the defensive end, then he would probably play more. And then he's a guy that can score a little bit, and he is someone that can get his own shot. But I agree with the guard rotation big time, and this is why the closer we get to the draft, and it might change again. I change my mind all the time, but I'm looking at if there's guards there, because I think that the draft, you can get veterans and you'll be able to get veteran role players. But in terms of someone that you think can impact the team right away, the draft, even though it's pick 24, it might be your best chance. And there's a number of names that are there, but I was talking to some people about Jaden Hardy earlier today, and he was the guy that played at the G League Ignite. At one point, they thought he was going to be a top 5 pick. He didn't have a great year with the G League Ignite, but he was playing G League. He was playing against men. There was a bunch of other young, talented players on there that had the ball in their hands as well. But he's a guard, can really score. And maybe that's the guy that someone like that, where they go, okay, this guy has really, really good pedigree. And maybe, maybe you strike lightning at pick 24 and you find yourself someone that can play and can impact. And it's not the best way to approach building a team, Justin, pick 24. Yeah. But maybe they got to just nail this pick.
Yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth on it too. Like initially I was of the mindset of, well, it feels like you kind of have to keep the pick and make a pick here with everything you just went through. And Jordan Nwora is what you would cling to for young guys you could develop. So it's a roster that's getting old and getting expensive. So sooner or later you need cheaper, younger talent. But I mean, also it's old and it's expensive for a reason, that this is their title window, and somebody picked 24th, barring a really good player sliding down there, like we've seen in the past with players right around that range, like a Desmond Bane, I think jumps out the most. But it's very rare that you get immediate contribution like that. And that's really what they're looking for. So I kind of lean towards, I think it's going to be part of a package for a smaller move that they make. But regardless, you would like to see somebody start to develop now. And, Bud, I don't think he gets a ton of credit for the way that some of their role players can develop. And I think the reason for it is because not all of them do. But I mean, think about what Bobby Portis did. And yes, that's on Bobby Portis and the work that he put in. But Bobby Portis, night and day, different player from when he arrived in Milwaukee to what he is now. He's more balanced. Pat Connaughton, you can put him in the same sentence as Giannis too. When we talk about Giannis and the work he would put in every year and getting better in every area and category, that's what Pat Connaughton did. When you think about what he arrived as, of basically just a role player that could shoot, to the slasher, to the defender, to the guy that became a really good shooter, that he's a well-rounded player. So they've had the knack and ability to do that. And even George Hill becoming an almost 50% three-point shooter, and everything fell into place that season. So we've seen that growth. Maybe we were starting to see some of it last year from Javon Carter, and this was a system that was perfect for him. So I'm curious what his future holds with this team. But, I mean, this is just kind of the cards that they're dealt, that, yes, it would be nice to get some young talent, but you're playing for a championship. So I think that's kind of the route we're going to see taken here in this offseason.
You mentioned a young big Camille, and someone that and I've said this all the time, and I've kind of laughed about it a little bit, but there's always, every offseason with every fan base, there's like one player, whether it's in the draft or it's like, a veteran. So Mo Bamba's the guy, which I still find, it's just funny to me. But than the guy in the draft, which I just would steer clear of drafting a center. And to me, it's I just would not do that. But the guy that is generating a lot of buzz and he's going to be around that range and does have a really good skill set, was dominant defensively in college, was Walker Kessler. And I wouldn't get a big in the draft. How do you feel about that, Camille?
I would agree with that. Like, I know, like you meant, Mo Bamba is the name that Bucks Twitter has clung to.
Yes.
And all I can really personally say about Mo Bamba is I love the song by Sheck West titled Mo Bamba, but that's probably the end of my love for Mo Bamba. Like, if I could get a free agent center off the market, I would personally like to try to get Isaiah Hartenstein, like to see if we can get a center like that.
That's a good name.
And it's not a flashy name. It's not, super athletic, but like he plays defense, he shoot, like he does his job. And one thing that I always hear like Bucks players say is like, be a star in your role. And he is somebody who I think could be a star in his role, especially if he gets a year under Brook, where we can kind of see, like I was mentioning earlier, see if he could, possibly be the center that, takes the baton from Brook once he does have to move on. But I would not look to draft a center. I would prefer we draft a wing or a guard if we keep that pick at 24.
Hartenstein, Justin. First of all, Kevin Harlan would be pumped every time he comes back to Milwaukee. But I had his name jotted down as well. He's under the radar and probably not someone that a lot of people will initially be excited about. But if I was getting a big, and historically, well, the last couple of years anyway, after Robin Lopez essentially, and then the year before they had a million centers with Thon and John Henson and all those guys. But the last couple of years anyway, they've kind of steer clear of having a traditional backup big or a backup five. So it would be interesting whether someone like Hartenstein would get better opportunities elsewhere, or what they would even have to do to bring him there. But I think the one thing that we learned this year is it would be nice to at least have someone in case of emergency at that position.
And Hartenstein is somebody that you saw the free agents and thought, man, he would look nice too. I just don't see why the Clippers wouldn't match. I mean, especially with their situation and their cap situation, especially with the tax that they're in for all right now. So I would assume that they want him around long term, and it's Zubats that they're willing to move on from. And I think a year that he's up. So that'd be great. I just I don't see it happening. And when you look at the rest of the list, it's not a very flattering list of free agents for bigs. And I don't know what it is that somewhere around February, when you got to the trade deadline, that Mo Bamba just started to become the guy, especially with Bucks Twitter. But it's not going away anytime soon. And everybody pointed out, well, do you think they could do this? Or how do they do this? They're not getting Mo Bamba for the taxpayer mid-level exception. Somebody is going to pay him more than that. And, we've talked about this before too. I don't think you can assume they're going to use the taxpayer mid-level, that maybe it's a part of keeping Bobby or keeping Pat, or you use part of it. And this isn't me advocating for not spending the money, but we had the same conversation last year. And what you need to understand is that $6-point-something million exception that they would have for the taxpayer mid-level, that's $33 million in tax money that they're going to end up paying. So there's a lot of reasons for the ownership group to say, well, is this guy really worth it? So I think you need to level set the expectations on, yes, it'd be great to retain Bobby and Pat Connaughton and use that. But I think there's a decent chance that does not happen.
Speaking of money, I did a crossover podcast with our friend Matt George from Locked On Kings this morning, a few hours ago. And we were talking about Dante DiVincenzo, and I asked about what his expectation is for what his contract is going to be. And you should go and listen to that podcast if you haven't already. It was interesting to hear the Sacramento perspective of what Dante brought. They assume that he's coming back. I thought, I wasn't sure what damage, the contract, with the injuries and let's say inconsistent play, if we're being kind. But he still sort of believed that he's still going to get sort of 10 plus million per year, which does make sense. And part of that might be just the free agent market. And the Kings, really, they traded for the guy. They clearly wanted him for a couple of years. They'll probably keep him. But that was an interesting podcast. Dante, obviously an old friend.
I just wonder. I mean, it would be great here, and it would have been great to have Dante during the Celtics series, unfortunately. But I just wonder. I mean, we saw this stuff come out towards the end of the year that made it seem like Dante wasn't too happy being in Sacramento, but it seems like there would be a team that maybe not necessarily a title contender, because there's not a whole lot of those with money, but there would be a team that's at least a playoff contending team that would look at Dante's skill set and say, well, he could be our second guard off the bench, and this is perfect for what we're looking for. So I would assume he would be on more of a winning team through free agency than staying in Sacramento.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. One other one I've got for you, Camille. I mentioned this yesterday, and it's not a huge surprise, but Quinn Snyder's out in Utah. And then, of course, we see today, as probably predicted, Charles Lee is going to be one of a cast of many that's going to get an interview. And it looks like they're going to be interviewing sort of 10 guys or something like that. So it's going to be a wide net they're throwing out there. It'll be interesting to see whether Charles Lee gets the job. I think we would all love him to. But let's just say that Charles Lee gets this job, which firstly would be great for him. Secondly, it would be really, really interesting this offseason with two faces that have been there forever with Bud, basically. They've been with him for a long, long time. And the two lead voices really on the bench. So the Bucks are going to have some faces change on the bench. And, I don't necessarily think that's going to be a bad thing. I'm kind of excited to see who they bring in. And I mentioned yesterday, I don't know whether Quinn wants to jump straight back on the bench, but if he wants to go and coach alongside Bud again, I would also be excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a dream scenario, I would think, to have a voice like that on the bench as an assistant for Bud. And even, I mean, thinking about Darvin Ham and Charles Lee, like the relationship, as you mentioned, that Bud has with both of them it's real, it's deep. Even during Darvin Ham's press conference, when he mentioned Bud, he kind of got a little bit emotional thinking about like the years they spent together and all he's been able to learn. And Bud's starting to make his own little coaching tree, which is kind of cool to see. But I agree with you on the new voices on the bench being a good thing. I listen to the Dunker Spot podcast a lot. And one thing they mention often about the Bucks offense is that it needs a little bit more seasoning on it. Like we just need to do a little bit different than what we have been doing. So maybe getting some new voices on the bench can help freshen up the offense a little bit, throw in some new plays that they can run, some new actions, and open things up in a different way than they haven't before. So I don't think necessarily like it's going to be a bad thing to have new voices. Of course, you're going to miss what Charles brought if he does get the Utah job. We're going to, of course, miss what Darvin Ham brought. But change isn't always a bad thing. So I'm going to look optimistically about what the coaching situation can look like for the Bucks.
I think there's two reasons, Justin, why the Bucks as a assistant coach destination would be very attractive. The first is Bud. Because, if you look at Darvin Ham and Taylor Jenkins, and then, historically, Charles Lee always been in the mix here. Historically, Bud has been able to have guys on his staff that have gone on to get jobs. And I know Bud is someone that's controversial with Bucks fans and Bucks Twitter for whatever reason. But
NBA fans too.
Yeah, the history is there. I mean, it's not made up. It's what we've seen. So I think that would be attractive. Then obviously, I would imagine that there is a lot of coaches out there that have some ideas of some stuff that they could do with Giannis, and that has to be, make it one of the prime jobs that are going to be out there.
Well, I think we all agree Charles Lee is in that spot that Darvin was in the last couple of years, where I don't think he's going to get the job in Utah. It seems like they already have a pretty good idea of who they want, but it was the same thing with Darvin, where it's just every year it's one of these years he's leaving for a head coaching job. And I think that's where Charles Lee is at, that if it's not this offseason, it's going to be next year. But Darvin got a job this year. Taylor Jenkins, of course, what we've seen him do with Memphis. We mentioned James Borrego, and we've heard Bud speak extremely highly of James Borrego, their time together in San Antonio, starting as soon as JB got to Charlotte with the Hornets. So there's a relationship there. Kenny Atkinson, another guy that was on his staff. And, of course, the big one that everybody wants is Quinn Snyder. Now, where it would make sense for me for Quinn Snyder is you already pointed to the offense. Perfect. That's what this team needs. And the other part is if you're Quinn Snyder, I'm sure he wants to get back in the head coaching ranks as quickly as possible.
Don't you dare.
Well, no. That's not what I'm saying. The best way to do that is if you're the lead assistant with the Bucks and they win another championship, you are gone.
Yeah.
You can find your own spot the next year. So it's gonna be one of the better openings out there, non-head coach openings, for somebody to really say, if I'm on the staff, if I'm one of the lead assistants, and we have Giannis, so we have a chance to win the title, that means I'm going to have a good chance to get a job the following offseason.
Yeah, the talk, I guess, is San Antonio,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Is it actually confirmed that Pop doesn't want to go for another decade? I felt like a couple of years. It felt like a couple of years ago that maybe he was running out of steam, but he seems like he's back having a good time. I'm not sure.
I don't know about having a good time. I don't know who's ever watched Pop and said that guy seems like he's having a good time.
Well, I have a good time watching Pop.
I mean, we all do. That's part of what makes Pop legendary. Like, he's one of the greatest coaches we've ever seen, and I felt the same way. Where I thought we were coming close to the end of Pop's time in San Antonio, but he seems to have been like reinvigorated with like this younger team that he has now at this point, and what he's been able to do with like DeJounte Murray and some of the guys they have over there. So who knows at this point how long Pop plans to coach. And now that you have this idea in my head about Quinn Snyder becoming a lead assistant for the Bucks, I need that to happen. So, might as well just, hey, if you're listening to this, just come wait your time out here, wait Pop out here in Milwaukee with Bud. And, when that opens up, you make your move,
The other one too is I know there's no connections to Bud, but we're talking about offense, and he's been up for head coaching jobs. But don't you put the hard sell on and say, look,
the Pringle man,
you're getting close to retirement. Mike D'Antoni, why don't you just come here and run the offense and be one of my lead assistants?
He was in Brooklyn last year, correct?
Mm-hmm. But we've seen him Charlotte. He's in the running, in strong chance.
One of the last two.
Charlotte. Yeah.
Yeah, he's been around, no doubt. Yeah, it would be interesting. I'm sure the general NBA landscape would be buzzing if the Bucks had D'Antoni there, and so everyone having their ideas of what he could potentially do with Giannis in this offense. It's going to be interesting. One last quick one. I just saw a tweet just before we started recording here. Old friend DJ Wilson with a workout with the Lakers. Now, we mentioned DJ as one of the draft picks that potentially didn't get to where the Bucks wanted him to go to. I don't think that's been too harsh, but he's floated around a little bit, had some big games with the Oklahoma City G League team, I believe, the Oklahoma Blue, I think they're called. But he actually always did have a good relationship with Darvin. I think everyone had a good relationship with Darvin, but not a huge surprise to see DJ Wilson there getting the workout with the Lakers. I'd be happy to see him out there, Camille. Get DJ back in the NBA.
Honestly, I have a soft spot for like most old Bucks guys, even if they didn't work out, just from watching them here during their time. And DJ, given the Lakers cap situation and what they have going on with their roster, they might need DJ Wilson to eat up some of those minutes.
I was going to say Wayne Ellington, Dwight Howard, Kent Bazemore, Carmelo, Malik Monk, Avery Bradley. These are all guys on 1 year minimum deals. So it's going to be how they're rounding out the roster. We laugh, but the Bucks are in a pretty close spot to that too, where you hope guys like Wes Matthews will take the veterans minimum, and maybe you can get a few other ones there to do the same. But that's, we lived through this 2 years ago when you had second round picks that were on the roster just for cap purposes. That it's not quite reached that level, but it's also not to the level of the Lakers. But the Bucks aren't too far off from that with how top heavy their cap is. Yeah,
the Bucks traded pick 31 last year, which is, it's as good as they get in the second round, but it's, not the worst draft pick of all time to draft Mamu and Yorgos. So, that's the situation that we're in. We'll see what they do this year in the draft, but Mamu, who knows? He might come back. We'll see.
How it stuns me still to this day when I look over things and see Mamu's listed as 6'11", because you would swear when you watch him play, he's like 6'8" or 6'9".
He's an interesting player. I like him, but I don't know what his prospects are going to be next year. All right, let's wrap this up. This was good. Time flies when you got 3 people on the podcast. We'll have to do this again, but I just can't. I can't be out here doing 40-minute podcasts in the off season and then the next day scratching for what I'm going to talk about. So I got to wrap this up. Make sure you check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. They're going through all the draft stuff. So I know we mentioned a couple names here on this pod. We'll continue to do it. At some point, I'm going to have someone who has a little more expertise in the draft than me on the podcast, and we'll be able to ask all the questions we want to with the Bucks leading up. But Camille, I'm glad you're feeling well. Justin, I'm also glad you're feeling well, Justin. To be
Thank you.
All right, we'll leave it there. I think I mentioned this, Frank. I'm recording with Frank tomorrow. I'm also recording with Melanie Ricks, who anyone that's ever been to a Bucks game before knows Mel, and she started doing some sideline stuff. So another couple pods coming up tomorrow. But for now, we'll leave it there. Speak to you guys tomorrow.